Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hey, welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. We are just coming off a very, very busy weekend. The news cycle is always something, of course, we pay attention to and talk about here on this podcast. A lot of talk about Trump's supposed peace plan for Ukraine. It's a piece of crap, really, but we're going to talk about that actually in another podcast, but that dominated the news. What didn't get much mention, though, was the G20 summit, which was going on in South Africa, and that was a huge mistake by members of the Canadian media. A lot happened, and a lot happened that involved Canada, and, of course, the fact that the U.S. was not going to be there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that on the podcast, because while a lot of critics and so-called pundits in this country are continually going on, well, Prime Minister Carney is just globetrotting, not doing anything, not getting anything done on trade. You know, what about trade deals? He's doing a lot. And a lot of that, I think, was come to the fore because of some of the things that were going on at this G20 summit in South Africa. So let me explain. This is, of course, where the world leaders, the G20, get together. And it's not unlike the G7, obviously more members in this particular thing. This time it was going to be held in South Africa. The United States did not go. As a matter of fact, they made a big deal of the fact that they were not going to go. They were going to boycott the G20, which was not surprising. Trump has no use for any time world leaders get together because basically it pretty much shows up how weak he is as a world leader. He wants to be the big cat, of course, and basically, as we've seen at other summits, G20s and others, they mock him behind his back, sometimes right in front of him, when these things get together because they realize that this guy's just a pretender. He's not anything what he makes out to be. And there's a lot of evidence of that in South Africa during this G20 summit. But because he did not go, there was some politics involved in that too, because there's the passing of the torch. The G20, as important as it is going to be in the United States next year. And there was a ceremony that's supposed to take place traditionally that obviously couldn't the way that it was supposed to because the U.S. Decided not to attend this thing. And I'll explain that in a couple of seconds. But let me get back to some of the comments about what was going on. Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, was at the summit and was very pointed in some of the comments that he had to say. He addressed an economic symposium that was held. Now, I guess technically this wasn't really part of the G20 meetings. It wasn't on the schedule, but it was an economic symposium that was happening at the same time. And all the world leaders, prime ministers, presidents, and others and their staff were present at. So it's a big deal with a lot of the folks that were involved in this, representing about 75% of the world's population and 75% of the world's economies, too. And Prime Minister Carney, I think, was very pointed in his comments about what they should be doing, what we should be doing as a global community when he talked about this, when he talked about the leaders themselves. Let me put up a clip. This is a little piece of exactly what he was talking about and some of the points that he made when he was addressing this economic summit just a couple of days ago. Speaking to the world leaders at the G20 summit, they agreed to a joint declaration, by the way, which the United States was really pissed off about because they figured, hey, they're not going to do any business because we're not there and we're the big dog. But they did this anyway. And the Prime Minister mentioned that he noted that the governments who signed or represent 3/4 of the global population, 2/3 of the world economic output. In other words, these are the power brokers. These are the people globally that are going to be making decisions. Now, the U.S. wasn't there, and I loved Prime Minister Carney's take on that. He said, I look at it more as who shows up, who engages, and who does the work. According to our prime minister. So kind of a backhanded slap at the United States, isn't it, for not being there? He said the American absence was a reminder that the center of gravity in the global economy is shifting. Quote, away from you guys, by the way, Americans, with the economic and political power being diffused toward multiple countries, including the global south. Our task here is to ensure that Canada doesn't only endure this shift, but that we prosper under it. Now, incredible comments from the Prime Minister there, and he's a man of backing up his words, too, and as we'll explain with some of the actions that he did there, because this was all about global trade. And contrary to what, Polyev and some of the others are saying, they're scoring points with this. I mean, one of the big things that did make some news finally was a number of discussions that the Prime Minister had with Indian Prime Minister Modi. They're going to establish economic relations once again with India. Some people are kind of nervous about that. Now, there's some trepidation. I get that. But he told reporters that a comprehensive deal between Canada and India has a lot more benefit than the talks toward a sectoral agreement that Canada suspended back in 2023. In other words, we understand that there's some concerns about security and espionage and a number of other things, and those things aren't being forgotten. We're not going in this with rose-colored glasses. But Carney is talking about the economic benefits. In other words, we don't trust Putin, but we still trade with Russia. I mean, that stuff goes on all the time. And as he mentioned, Carney announced that Ottawa and South Africa have agreed to launch discussions about an investment protection pact, too. In other words, he's setting the table here, and in some cases actually signing deals that are going to diversify trade. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what the Prime Minister talked about from day one. It's about less reliance on the United States. You get this now? All right. Everybody's focused on, well, don't have a deal with Trump yet. That's not important. There's not going to be a deal with Trump, probably anytime soon, maybe never, because of Trump's attitude. As we've talked about on the podcast before, don't fall into this trap that, well, Canada's not getting the deal. It's the United States that's inflexible here, and Carney's just said, fine, forget about it. I'm going to go and we're going to change partners here, and we're going to talk with the UK. We're going to talk with Scandinavian countries. We're going to talk with Africa. There's a huge market there. And no, it's not number one priority for Canada, certainly not. Those established partnerships that we've already talked about need to be strengthened and expanded, and he's done that with some of the deals. But you can't ignore Africa. And he is not ignoring Africa and other nations, including India. And that's what you should be doing. That's what we want our world leader to be doing. That's what we want our Prime Minister to be doing. He's coming away with results. And the more that this happens, and the more that we create these established relationships and see these things prosper, we're less reliant on the United States market. So when Trump wants to talk about imposing tariffs, or he wants to raise tariffs, or he wants to say, okay, I'm going to block goods, knock yourself out, buddy, because, it's important to us and always will be, but we've got other options. And that's what the Prime Minister is talking about here. So it's so very important that this goes on. I'll go back to that point that he made here. Our task is to ensure that Canada doesn't just endure this shift, which is happening anyway, but that we can prosper from it. This is a guy that's got his elbows up. For the critics that are saying, oh, what's so much for elbows up? He's still got the elbows up, people. He's still doing it. He's working the corners. He's making sure that we're pushing away the people that are not going to be beneficial to us, and we're making relationships with people that can be beneficial to us. And that's going to pay off big time, and it's already started to with some of the diversification that we've talked about. So that's how he's scoring points at this conference in such a big way. And that's why it was so important. And when a lot of people are just scratching their heads when the Americans decided not to go there. And let's face it, it's because Trump doesn't like that. He's not comfortable there. He can't be the star. Trump has to be the star at whatever he goes to. And he's not the star at the G20. He's not the star when he's at the G7. As a matter of fact, they pretty much make short shrift of him because they realize he's not a player. He thinks he is. He thinks he's the ultimate deal maker, but it's just not the case. And you know what? You can't fool the experts. These are the experts. These are the leaders of the other nations. Like I say, the ones that were down at Johannesburg, 75% of the world economies were represented there. The United States was not there, which only goes to show, as the Prime Minister mentioned in kind of a backhanded way, we can do this without the United States. They can come along, and we're still going to have some sort of a trade relationship, and so will other countries with the Americans, but you're not the big dog anymore. Sorry. The power is shifting, and the Americans just don't seem to realize that. And those that do see that shift happening in the States are pretty angry about it because they realize, hey, the sand is shifting below us here, and it's because of that guy in the White House. But, that's something they're going to have to learn to deal with. The Prime Minister is looking at this as opportunity. Not just wringing his hands saying, oh, we don't have a deal with the Americans yet. What are we going to do? Well, are we going to capitulate? No, hell no, we're not going to do that. We're going to diversify. We're going to strengthen our economic position in the rest of the world. And that's part of the strategy. And he's already doing that. So this, going from this country to that country, these aren't photo ops, people. He's coming back with solid business deals, solid agreements. As a matter of fact, even as we're doing this podcast today, And the prime minister is heading back to start looking at other things that are going on here, of course, at the home territory. Minister Jolie is on her way to South Korea to further explore the possibility of submarine purchases and some other deals to do with tech and other things. So that's the modus operandi of Carney and his team right now, is to diversify and to get us out there. And we used to be, oh yeah, and Canada was there too. Now we're a player. And we saw that at the G20 with Carney, of course, addressing this economic symposium. We saw it when the UN opened a couple of months ago in New York, for their fall session. Upwards of 85 diplomats, VIPs, and world leaders that were all attending that had requested a meeting, an audience, so to speak, with Mark Carney. This guy globally has this incredible reputation as a guy that gets things done and a guy that knows what he's talking about, as opposed to the attitude that people had about Donald Trump and continue to have about Donald Trump, as they're caving in. And you can see the erosion of global confidence in the U.S. and the U.S. economy and the U.S. leadership. As we've talked about on the podcast, and as the prime minister has mentioned, somebody has to fill that void. Putin would love to. President Xi from China would love to. And they're gonna try to move in there. But we have a role to play here, and we have an opportunity to see what's going on. And that's what the prime minister is doing at conventions like this and at summits like this. It's an important role to play. However, even though the United States was not there, as to say, part of the closing ceremonies, as it were, is kind of the passing of the gavel. And it's a ceremonial thing, but it's kind of like, okay, it's in South Africa. The president of South Africa officially hands the gavel to the U.S. president, and the president takes it back with him because, that's where the summit's going to be next year. Well, Trump didn't go. As a matter of fact, there was hardly anybody. There's nobody there as a U.S. official delegation there. But they mentioned, well, whoa, what about this passing of the gavel? The United States said he's not coming. We're not sending anybody. We'll send a junior diplomat from someplace anyway, some guy that probably goes for coffee in the morning, for the VIPs in the office. And basically the G20 executive and the South African president said, forget it. No, we'll give it. We'll pass you the gavel, but we'll do it in a couple of weeks, and no photo ops or anything else. You don't want to be part of the ceremony. You don't want to be part of the symposium. You don't want to be part of the summit. Then to hell with you. We don't need you. And of course, that just pissed the United States off even more, because they figured, what, we're going to carry on. We don't stop because you don't want to be there. We don't say, well, just throw up our hands and we can't get anything effectively done here because you're not there. They're moving on. The world is moving on. And that's maybe one of the most gratifying takeaways from this summit and other summits that we've seen right now, is the world is finally getting the message that if Donald Trump wants to thumb his nose at the institutions that are trying to keep the peace in this world, that are trying to keep the economy flowing in this world, then to hell with him. We'll just do it without him. And that's what they're starting to do. And that really bothers him. And so, everything that he's trying to do here to try to send a message is really just backfiring, not just for him, but for the American people, too. Now, he wasn't there, okay, but that doesn't mean they weren't talking about him. There are all sorts of speculation stories that we've heard anecdotally from the symposium and from the summit about other world leaders and some of the comments that they had to make about the president. First of all, his absence from that, but second of all, about his personality. Some of the more biting comments came during the last day of the symposium, an address to the Economic Summit by Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Now, Professor Sachs is a professor of economics at Columbia University. He's got a long CV of global work. He also works for the United Nations, of course, a policy analyst for the UN and a number of other different organizations. He's one of the go-to guys when it comes to global economics. And he addressed the summit and talked about some of the challenges and some of the ways the G20 can address some of those challenges. But he also talked about his president, Donald Trump, and had some rather biting words to say. Let's learn that clip now of Professor Sachs.
Now there's a West Wing and no East Wing because he knocked it down a couple weeks ago, this idiot. Excuse me. Sorry, it's true. I'm just being technical. It's
getting very personal, too, but you notice the laugh track in the background there. I mean, other people are understanding what's going on, too. And Professor Sachs talked at great length about some of the other challenges and about the role that the Americans could be playing in this situation and are not playing. Here's a little more of Professor Sachs.
A major refinery in Venezuela suddenly exploded. That seems a lot like the CIA to me. I don't guarantee it. We don't have any more news. But last week, President Trump said he had assigned the CIA to operations inside Venezuela, and a week later, suddenly the biggest refinery blows up. So the United States can hardly go a week at a time without trying to kill somebody.
Not really a laughing matter. I think that's nervous laughter more than anything else. But I think it's very poignant to see the response that's going on there. And of course, he's talking about some of the things that Trump is doing now with Venezuela, blowing up fishing boats that he says are drug runners, threatening war now with Venezuela, and carrying on. Now, we've mentioned on the podcast, and I'm of the opinion that this is a typical situation of Trump simply saying, "Hey, look over here." It's basically the wag the dog theory. In other words, let's create a diversion over here. So you're not talking about how shitty our economy is in the United States. You're not talking about the fact that I can't get a deal signed between Russia and Ukraine. I can't get a peace deal there. The failure after failure after failure in the United States. Instead, let's talk about going to war with somebody. That's a great way to rally the flag and and invoke patriotism and let's face it, there's an awful lot of MAGA people that are just going to fall head over heels and say yeah, let's do that, with no recourse at all. And this is different. I know I was seeing some of the comments over the weekend on one of the platforms. I forget whether Substack or on Blue Sky, kind of equating this to what Margaret Thatcher did with the Falkland Islands. Yes and no. There are some similarities, but it's basically it's an attempt here for Trump to simply change the channel. And let's face it. I mean, if you're going to go to Venezuela with American military power, it's not going to be much of a conflict, and that means victory. And this is what this guy's looking for right now. Trump wants something to brag about. And if he can beat up on Venezuela and all of us start talking about regime change there, which, by the way, he denied as late as about 3 days ago, saying, well, this is not about changing the government. This is getting rid of the drug trade. Now he's saying the President Maduro there is one of the kingpins of the drug trade, and yeah, he wants him out. So explain to me again why it's okay for a president of the United States to be directly involved in an attempt to regime change. In other words, boot a leader out of a country, no matter how bad this guy is, for them to get involved with the CIA. And as Professor Sachs said, Trump's being blatant about it. This is not covert. He's right out there telling everybody, I'm sending them in there to try to blow up this government and maybe blow up part of the government themselves. I mean, physically and literally. This is what he's doing right now to another sovereign nation. This is the mindset that this guy has. So, and I'm not suggesting he's going to do that here, but for those who hear him talking about taking over Canada and making us the 51st state, don't think that this guy won't go to extreme means to try to carry that out. I'm not suggesting we're next on his list, but as idiotic and strange as this guy sounds, you have to understand that he has the power of this great military force, and he basically has a carte blanche from just about everybody in the United States now, from the political to the judicial side of things, to do whatever he wants to whomever he wants with no consequence to that. And that's a pretty scary situation. So I don't know what's going to happen with Venezuela. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a future podcast. But they're talking about it, and they were talking about it at the G20 because they understand that this guy is just a loose cannon, literally, in the White House. And let's face it, the days of the immense economic and worldly influence of the United States are fading, and it's happening right before our eyes. And I think people that are standing back, not just in the United States, but I'm talking about in the other parts of the world, the G7, the G20, and other summits, including NATO, by the way, they see it. And instead of simply saying, oh, my God, what are we going to do? The proactive governments, and I include Prime Minister Carney in that, are doing something about it. And they're simply saying, okay, we're going to do this without them. And we'll be fine. We'll be fine. And, whatever's going to happen politically in the United States is going to happen. But I think we need to take comfort in the fact and be proud of the fact that our leader, our prime minister, is taking the lead on that. And again, I know that when he talked like that a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, I guess now, when it became evident and everything seemed to cycle around, the trade deal, we got to get Trump on our side. No, we don't. We need to look at the global situation, as the Prime Minister talked about at this symposium, and we have to understand that we need to not just survive this shift that's happening, and it is happening, but we need to thrive. We can benefit from this. And he's putting us in a position now to do that. That's leadership. That's what we expect from our Prime Minister, and that's what he's doing. He's delivering on that course. And if Poilievre doesn't get that, well, that's just another shortcoming of Poilievre's. And the Poilievres and the Andrew Scheers and the other critics that are simply saying that he's wasting time and not getting anything done, they're either not paying attention or they're just not smart enough to understand the strategy and the benefits of that strategy. We're watching it, and we're simply saying that's the sort of thing we need in this country. And we can be a player. And what I find gratifying about this is that this is not just me as a Canadian or a group of us on this side of the border thinking, isn't that kind of nice? We can be sort of proud of that. The world is paying attention to what Prime Minister Carney is saying. The world is paying attention to what Prime Minister Carney is doing. And the world is talking to Prime Minister Carney and saying, how can we survive? What do we need to do next? He's a player here because they know him. He's got a reputation. He's met with many of these. He knows many of these world leaders already because he's been doing business with them, politically and otherwise. And it's a very important aspect to this. And other people understand that and realize that too. And one of them is Ben Meiselas, who's actually one of the co-founders of Midas Touch podcast. This is, if you're vaguely familiar with the Midas Touch podcast, it's probably one of the great success stories in podcasting and social media. These guys started off and just almost overnight. I know there's a lot of work to it, and Ben and his brother have really put a lot into this. But it was a classic example of a voice and a platform for people that just didn't exist before to be able to talk openly about politics without fear of reprisal. And obviously with clowns like Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and others, and Jeff Bezos, who control or thought they controlled the entire social media platforms, along these guys come and simply say, to hell with them, we're going to do it our way. And the success has been simply overwhelming. Well, Ben Meiselas was watching what was going on in the G20 down in Johannesburg as well. And he had some rather poignant comments about our Prime Minister. Here's what he had to say.
And always, Prime Minister Carney delivers a great speech. That's a given. And here, Prime Minister Carney leans in on the issue of resiliency, of multilateralism, of addressing climate change as a moral and economic and ethical imperative. And it just, as an American, to see these world leaders who are so well-spoken, who are professional, who behave this way, it's like, can we get back to that, please? Can we get one of those here in the United States of America?
Not the first, and nor I think the last observer, as Ben just articulated there, who see what our Prime Minister is doing on the global stage, and they're impressed. Which is what, and just if you can juxtapose that with some of the crap that you hear from some of the people on this side of the border, from the the Sun newspaper chains or the Post, the National Post, and some of the commentaries that you see in there, they just don't get it, or they do get it, because some of these, they're not stupid people. I hope a lot of them understand what's going on. They just don't want you to understand it. They want you to think that this guy's not getting anything done. He is. But they're going to try to put their spin on it. And people like, well, the Midas Touch and Ben Meiselas and others, they cut through that shit. They know that this, okay, we're not falling for that. We see what's happening. All right? We believe our eyes. We believe our ears. And we see that there's leadership going on. And one final point, by the way, because the Prime Minister, as I say, did address the economic symposium as well. And for those critics, some of the ones who I'm just talking about here, that say, for instance, the budget, which just passed, of course, a few days ago, and some people on the left side of the political spectrum are berating the Prime Minister for abandoning his environmental concerns. Not true. Not true. They're wrapped in a different package, but they're still there. And Prime Minister Carney talked about that, I think, in great detail during his address. Here's a little bit of what he had to say at the summit this past weekend.
And lasting peace. Now let me speak to climate change. It's been over a decade that we've realized that past is not prologue with respect to climate change. In other words, the tail risks of yesterday become the central scenarios of today. Tipping points are now being realized. And I want to give an example. 2 years ago, the forest fires in Canada alone made Canada the 4th largest emitter of carbon in the world. We have the example of the Darwin cyclone. Last year, or this year, forest fire damage forests bigger than Sierra Leone, to give orders of magnitude. So we need action on all levels: mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. International collaboration is crucial. I want to thank our hosts, South Africa, Mexico, and others who send firefighters to Canada to help fight the fires.
That's the kind of collaboration, that's the kind of partnership that we've been looking for. That's the kind of stuff that the Prime Minister's been talking about since he got the job earlier this year. And, you know, the evidence is in. He is delivering. Now, you know, it's got to continue. This you don't ever just say, okay, we can put the toolbox away now. It's all done. I've made the speeches and everything is going to just fall into place. Of course it's not. It's going to take a lot of hard work, as Prime Minister Carney just articulated there. But at least he's doing it. At least he's getting it done. There are no platitudes from this Prime Minister. There are action plans, and putting these action plans into play so we can all see the benefit to it. So I'm encouraged by what happened. I said at the beginning of the podcast here, I wish there had been more coverage of the G20. It was very important, I think, to understand and I think to recognize the role that Canada is playing, the increasing role that Canada is playing as the world is shifting. There's a power structure going on and a power shift that's going on. And we saw that coming. I mean, they happen in politics, they happen in economics. And a lot of the time, Canada in the past has been on the sidelines just watching and hoping that, well, maybe we can survive this after the big powers do what they need to do and that tectonic shift actually starts to happen. Well, it's happening again. And we're not on the sidelines this time. We're right down there in the action. And it's gratifying to see. And we'll be tracking that, of course, and talking to you about it in future podcasts. But yeah, thank you so much for this one, though. It's a lot of fun because there's so much going on in the world today. It's going to be a busy week coming up this week, too, and we'll talk about a number of different issues here on the podcast. Thanks for being with us this time. Of course, if you're watching us on YouTube, great to have you with us. Don't forget to hit that notification bell, okay? And thanks to everybody for your subscriptions. It's great to see that support. As we say, we love doing this, and your subscriptions and your support helps us to carry on with this work. So we do thank you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, well, give it some thought, okay? And we'd love to have you on board as well. Thanks as always to Madeline Kelly for the great work producing this and getting out to you in a speedy fashion so we can continue to be current about what's happening in the world these days, this ever-changing world. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed. Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.